Good evening, this is the archive. Tonight, New Orleans, Louisiana. The year is 1887. 3 years have passed since this city threw open its doors to the world. The world's industrial and cotton centennial exposition drew hundreds of thousands of visitors to New Orleans in 1884. Stockholders had gathered early that year to secure the venture's capital. The ambition was extraordinary, and for a season, it delivered. Now the fairgrounds are quiet, but the city is not. New Orleans in 1887 sits at a crossroads. The wounds of Reconstruction have not fully healed. The racial hierarchies of the Old South remain deeply embedded in law, in custom, in the daily life of every street corner and courthouse. Yet commerce pushes forward regardless. Cotton is king along the levee. Steamboats sit heavy in the brown water of the Mississippi, their decks stacked with bales bound for New York, for Liverpool, for the mills of the industrial world. Horse-drawn wagons clatter across the cobblestones before dawn. The dockworkers, many of them black men, some of them recently free, labor through the heat without rest. Across the nation, the railroads are building at a pace no previous generation could have imagined. According to the Lake Charles Commercial, an astonishing 6,768 miles of new track were laid across the United States in a single year. The iron web is tightening. New Orleans intends to be at the center of it. The gas lamps flicker on along the French Quarter's iron-laced balconies. The city breathes, it calculates, it endures. New Orleans, in the winter of 1884, was a city with something to prove. The wounds of Reconstruction had not fully healed. The cotton economy had suffered. The port, once the beating heart of American commerce, had watched rival cities grow faster and louder. But Louisiana was not finished, and the men with money knew it. Stockholders of the world's industrial and cotton centennial exposition gathered that January to discuss capital arrangements. According to the Lake Charles Commercial, the meeting drew considerable attention, not just in New Orleans, but across the state. Even small papers in southwest Louisiana followed the preparations closely. That alone tells you something about the scale of ambition involved. The exposition was planned for New Orleans. It was to be a World's Fair in the fullest sense of the phrase, a celebration of cotton, the crop that had built the South, and of American industry at its most ambitious hour. The organizers wanted the world to look at New Orleans and see a city reborn. The timing was deliberate. 1884 marked roughly 100 years since American cotton had entered the global market in earnest. Hence the name, the Cotton Centennial. It was history and commerce combined into one grand statement, and the country around it was moving fast. The Lake Charles Commercial reported that 6,768 miles of new railroad track had been laid across the United States in a single year, 1,883 alone. That number staggered the imagination. It meant that markets once out of reach were suddenly connected. It meant that New Orleans, with its port and its railroads, could be a hub for all of it. That was the promise the exposition was meant to fulfill. It was an argument made in iron and glass and exhibition hall banners. Come and see what the South has built. Come and see what it intends to build next. The main exhibition hall rose enormous and luminous on the grounds of what is now Audubon Park. Crowds moved through wide aisles in their Victorian dress. Machinery hummed. Banners hung from iron rafters. For a few months, New Orleans felt like the center of the American story again. Whether that feeling would last was another matter entirely. In January of 1884, the Lake Charles Commercial published a number that stopped readers cold. According to the paper, 6,768 miles of new railroad track had been laid across the United States in a single year. 1 year. That was 1,883. To put that figure in context, it was enough iron rail to stretch from New Orleans to San Francisco and back again, with miles left over. The nation was not merely building a railroad network, it was consuming the continent. For readers in southwest Louisiana, that number carried a personal weight. Lake Charles sat in a region still hungry for rail connections. Every mile of track laid somewhere else was a reminder of what they did not yet have. The wire dispatches reaching small papers like the Commercial carried news of a transformation happening faster than anyone had predicted. New Orleans understood this better than most. The Mississippi River had made the city. For generations, the great waterway funneled the produce of the interior, cotton, grain, sugar, down to the port and out to the world. No other route existed. No other route was needed. But the railroads were redrawing the map. Markets that once had no choice but to ship through New Orleans now had options. Chicago was rising. Cincinnati was rising. Rail lines were threading through territories that flatboats could never reach. The river's monopoly was cracking. It was reported that Louisiana boosters watched this shift with a mixture of urgency and ambition. New Orleans could adapt. It had done so before. A city with the port, the labor, and the commercial infrastructure could become a railroad hub as easily as a river hub. The question was whether the investment would come in time. The Gilded Age rewarded speed. It rewarded capital. It rewarded the men who moved first and moved boldly. In 1884, New Orleans was still moving. The World's Fair was coming. The rail lines were extending. The city believed it stood at the edge of something enormous. That belief was not unfounded. Whether it was enough was still being decided. In the Calcasieu Parish Jail, in February of 1884, 4 men were being held. The Lake Charles Commercial recorded their presence in a brief item. Terse, businesslike, almost indifferent. One of them was identified only as Lunt. The paper noted 2 things about him. He was colored, and he was charged with murder. That was the full entry. No first name, no account of the alleged crime, no detail of circumstance. Just a race and a charge, set down side by side in the ordinary notation of the day. Another prisoner was named Martin White. The charges against him were not specified. The names of the remaining 2 men were not recorded at all. This was the machinery of post-Reconstruction justice in Louisiana. Not dramatic, not theatrical, quiet and systematic. Race entered the record the way weather entered a ledger, as simple fact, requiring no explanation. Louisiana had formally ended Reconstruction in 1877. The federal troops were gone. The political protections that had briefly extended to black Louisianans were being methodically dismantled. What remained was a legal apparatus that treated race as a category of documentation. In the same weeks, the trial of H.F. Jenkins and Ned Jenkins was reported as underway. The Commercial noted it without elaboration. The charges were unclear. The 2 men shared a surname. They were tried together. The frontier parishes of southwest Louisiana were rough jurisdictions, and violent crimes were not rare. What the paper chose to record and what it chose to omit tells its own story. These cases did not make national news. They were not the subjects of editorial outrage or legal reform debates. They were footnotes in a small regional weekly, printed and forgotten within the week. But they were not nothing. They were the texture of daily life under a legal order rebuilding itself after the war, not toward equality, but away from it. The courthouse stood under its Spanish moss. The docket moved forward. And the names that entered that record did not all leave it the same way. 20 years later, New Orleans remained the undisputed commercial capital of the South. The port still moved cotton, sugar, and timber down to the Gulf. But the world around it had shifted in ways that 1887 could not have fully imagined. The railroad network kept growing. Those 768 miles laid in a single year were only the beginning. By 1900, rail lines crisscrossed Louisiana in every direction. Lake Charles, that small frontier town waiting on its connections, eventually got them. The iron tracks arrived. The timber industry followed. The town grew. The world's industrial and cotton centennial exposition opened in New Orleans in December of 1884. It drew over 1 million visitors. It showcased the South's ambitions to the nation. Then it closed. The buildings came down. The grounds were eventually absorbed into Audubon